talks from the crypt.
But, we can trace a lot of the early home haunts back to the early 70s,
Could you say that you could trace back the popularity of haunted theme park attractions to Southern California as well?
Yeah, Knott's Berry Farm started it in 1973.
And you went there, right?
So I grew up going to Knott's. I didn't go to Knott's Scary Farm. Back then it was called Halloween Haunt. I didn't go to Haunt until I was probably 11 or so. It was the early 80s, and we went with a church group from Irvine that I was part of. And so I always tell people the best thing I ever learned in church was about Knott's Scary Farm.
Yeah.
So we signed the waivers, tell your parents we're going to go, and we all piled into the church van, and we showed up in Buena Park, and we got out, and all the fog was flowing up over the fence and spilling out over La Palma, and we were like, what is this? You could hear people screaming. Yeah, unfortunately, that whole night is a blur, but I just remember coming away going, oh my God, I've been to Mecca. This is it. Like, I was probably 11 or 12, maybe 13 at the most. I don't know. But finding a whole theme park filled with mazes and roaming monsters in Ghost Town, and just holy shit, it was like the best thing ever, So that's the genesis. Knott's is the great I am of the haunt experiences in the theme parks, and it just kind of grew from there, and now it's a worldwide thing.
Yeah. What standards would you say that Knott's set in America at the time? Was it just the fact that it was a whole theme park filled with haunted attractions, or did they do anything specific that set them aside from maybe Universal?
Well, yes and yes. I mean, Universal didn't get into that game for decades later.
Really?
Not many people did. And that's why Knott's has such a big leg up than anybody else. I mean, this is year 49 for Knott's. And so, yeah, I mean, they started by creating the theme park event. I mean, really, it was Ghost Town at that point. Most of it was in Ghost Town. But roaming monsters. And then the genesis that also occurred there was sliding. And anybody that's been to a haunt literally anywhere in the world, you've seen slider monsters. That all originated. That can be traced right back to the streets of Calico in Ghost Town. Knott's, I always just lovingly refer to it as like you go to Knott's and it's like going to a garage haunt, like especially during the 80s, like 80s going into the early 90s. Knott's really started going to town with making just big funky props, and they just did everything like in-house, right? You go to other haunts and there are things like Transworld now where people go and they spend tens of thousands of dollars on, buying their catalog of what they're going to have in their haunts, and it all gets delivered. Whereas Knott's created everything, in-house. It resulted in things not looking so polished, but that's what gave it its cool charm, right? It was like a one of a kind. If you had a need for a gigantic spider or a giant jack-o'-lantern, they just made it.
Yeah.
And even if it looked kind of shitty or whatever, it didn't matter because it belonged to haunt. It belonged there. It lived there, and became part of the legend and the lore of Scary Farm. So I think the precedent that they set was just, taking this garage style haunt and just like blowing it up and creating their own IPs. I mean, Knott's has had some IP, stuff over the years, but that's not their forte. And they've always been the haunt. Like you go to Universal to see Blumhouse and Halloween and Texas Chainsaw and all this stuff, right? You go to Knott's to see the original mazes like Dominion of the Dead or Origins or, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what differentiates the two. And I guess that's the legacy of Scary Farm. The precedent that they set was just they make their own IPs, and the fans go nuts for it. The people were in love with it.
Their sets are incredible too.
Yeah. Well, they've gotten better. I mean, it really, it was kind of janky, in the 70s going into the early 80s, but mid 80s going into the 90s, things really started to become more impressive. And now, I mean, the class, they're world class, the mazes that are designed. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they've come a long way.
Was independent haunts a thing, or did Knott's kind of start that as well?
Well, there were independent haunts, but it wasn't like today where you're, here in Vegas, you go out and you can go to Freakling Brothers or, once upon a time, the Fright Dome, whatever. Back in the 70s, it was like the JCs, or church groups would for a fundraiser. Mm-hmm. And they weren't all over the place, right?